The large hall was filled with noise. It was the kind of noise that happens when many people talk at the same time. It was a busy Saturday afternoon at the community center, and everyone was rushing around. The air inside smelled strong. It was a mix of floor polish, hot coffee, and the dust that comes from old curtains. In just a few hours, this place would be full of rich people waiting for a show. Right now, though, it was just a mess of wires, chairs, and very stressed workers. A man stood near the back wall, holding a broom. He looked out of place among the fancy decorations and the people rushing back and forth. His name was not important to the people there. To them, he was just the cleaner. He was 50 years old, maybe older. It was hard to tell because his face was lined with deep wrinkles from years of working in the sun and the wind. He wore a gray shirt that had faded in the wash and a pair of black pants that were slightly too big for him. They hung loosely on his thin frame. The man stood very still. He watched a woman in a blue dress talking on a phone. She was the organizer of the event. She looked tired and angry. She was shouting at someone about the flowers. The man with the broom took a deep breath. He gripped the broom handle with one hand and reached into his pocket with the other. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was crumpled and soft from being handled many times. On the paper, he had written down a name and a time. He had been practicing for this. Every night for 6 months, after his shift at the grocery store ended, he would go home. He didn't have a real piano. He couldn't afford one. Instead, he had an old keyboard he bought at a thrift store. It was missing 2 keys and didn't make a sound unless he wore headphones. He would sit on the edge of his bed, wearing those headphones, pressing the keys gently. He learned the songs by heart. He felt the music in his fingers even when he couldn't hear it out loud. He dreamed of a day when he could play a real piano again, a piano that sang. He decided this was his chance. He walked across the room. His boots made a loud clacking sound on the hard floor, but nobody noticed. He walked up to the woman in the blue dress. She was still on her phone, looking at a list of names on a clipboard. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet. It was a rusty voice, like a gate that hadn't been open in a long time. The woman didn't look up. She just kept talking on the phone, waving her hand at him to go away. He waited. He stood there for a whole minute until she finally hung up and looked at him. She looked annoyed. She looked at his broom, then at his dirty shirt, and finally at his face. "What?" she asked sharply. "We are very busy here. If you are here to collect the trash, you have to wait until the event is over." "No, I am not here for trash," he said. He felt his hands start to shake, so he held them together. "I put my name down on the list for the performance." The woman stared at him. She let out a short, dry laugh. "You? On the performance list? That must be a mistake." "No mistake," the man said quickly. "I signed up last Tuesday. The man at the front desk said there was space for a short slot. 5 minutes. I just need 5 minutes." The woman sighed loudly. She flipped through the papers on her clipboard aggressively, making the paper snap. "Look, I don't know who told you that, but we are full. We have a university student coming to play the cello. We have a duo from the city choir. We don't have room for amateurs." "I am not an amateur," he said. He took a small step closer to her. "I know how to play. I have played for a long time. I just need one chance. Just one chance to show you." A younger man was walking past carrying a heavy box of cables. He stopped when he heard the conversation. He looked at the cleaner and smirked. "Hey, is this guy serious?" he asked the woman. The woman shook her head. "I don't have time for this," she said to the cleaner. "Listen to me. Tonight is about raising money. People are paying a lot of money to sit in these seats. They want to hear professionals. They want to see people in tuxedos. They do not want to watch a janitor play." The words hit the man hard, but he didn't move. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he kept going. "It is free," he said. "I don't need money. Just let me play before the show starts. Or during the break." "No," the woman said. She turned her body away from him, ending the discussion. "I have already told you no. It is not going to happen. Now please go back to work. The floor needs sweeping, and you are in the way." please," he said one last time. His voice cracked a little. "It is very important. I promised myself I would play today." The woman ignored him completely. She started talking to the younger man with the cables. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" she said, not trying to keep her voice down. "They think just because they can pluck a string, they are artists." The younger man laughed. "Maybe we can ask him to clean the piano after the show." They both laughed. The man with the broom stood there for a moment longer. He looked at the stage. In the center of the stage, covered by a protective cloth, sat a grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shiny. It looked like a sleeping beast waiting to wake up. He stared at it with such intensity that it felt like he was trying to touch it with his eyes. He thought about the late nights. He thought about the quiet moments in his small apartment when the music was the only thing that kept him warm. He thought about how empty life felt without it. He just wanted to sit on that bench. He wanted to feel the vibrations of the strings under his feet. He wanted to prove to the woman in the blue dress that he was more than just a person who sweeps floors. But the crowd was moving faster now. More volunteers were arriving. The noise was getting louder. He was invisible to them. He was just an obstacle in their path. He realized then that begging was not going to work. It never worked. It only made them hate him more. He lowered his head. He slowly folded the piece of paper back up and put it deep into his pocket. His fingers brushed against the edge of his wallet. He felt very tired all of a sudden. A deep, heavy tiredness that went all the way to his bones. "Okay," he whispered. He didn't say it to the woman. She wasn't listening anyway. He said it to the floor. "Okay." He turned around and walked away. He walked slowly toward the janitor's closet to put his broom away. As he walked, he passed a group of teenagers setting up chairs. They were laughing and joking, full of life and hope. None of them looked at him. He walked past a table full of expensive wine glasses. He walked past the velvet ropes that separated the VIPs from the regular people. He reached the closet. It was a small, dark room with a concrete floor. He put the broom back in its place. He leaned his head against the cold metal doorframe for a second. He closed his eyes. He could hear the muffled sounds of the hall on the other side of the wall. The sounds of a world that had no place for him. He felt a lump in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He didn't cry. He had stopped crying over things like this years ago. He just took a deep breath, picked up a rag and a spray bottle from a shelf, and walked back out into the noise. He had a job to do. Even if nobody wanted to hear his music, they still wanted clean floors. The afternoon light began to fade outside the high windows of the community center. The busy, chaotic energy from the earlier hours was starting to settle down. The volunteers had finished setting up the chairs. The banners were hung straight. The heavy work was done, and the only people left were a few staff members making final checks. The harsh smell of cleaning chemicals was still there, mixed now with the sweeter scent of the flower arrangements that had been placed near the front. The man stayed in the background, doing his best to be invisible. He wiped down the metal door handles of the entrance. He polished the glass of the showcase cases in the lobby. He moved slowly and carefully. He tried to stay out of everyone's way. The woman in the blue dress had walked past him earlier, talking on her phone again. She didn't even look at him. It was as if he were just another piece of furniture in the room. He felt a heavy weight in his stomach. The rejection earlier had hurt more than he wanted to admit. He kept telling himself it didn't matter. He was used to being looked down on. He was used to people assuming he couldn't do anything important because of his clothes or because his hands were rough from work. But today, the sting was sharper. He had really believed he had a chance. He had let his hopes get too high. He finished cleaning the lobby and walked back into the main hall. The room looked different now that it was empty. It looked grand. The rows of seats were pointed toward the stage like a field of yellow and red flowers. The lights were dimmed slightly, making the stage glow. He stood at the back of the room for a long time. He looked at the exit sign above the side door. He should leave. His shift was technically over. He could go back to his small apartment, put on his headphones, and play his silent keyboard. He could be safe there. But his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. He couldn't take his eyes off the center of the stage, Covered by a thick black cloth, sat the grand piano. It was a beast of an instrument. The rental company had brought it in that morning. It was made of shiny black wood that reflected the stage lights. It looked expensive. It looked dangerous. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch it. The rules were very clear. The staff was not to interact with the expensive equipment. But the hall was empty. The woman in the blue dress was in her office. The younger man with the cables was gone. The man took a step forward, then another. He walked down the aisle between the seats. He felt like he was walking in a dream. The sound of his boots on the carpet was muffled and soft. As he got closer to the stage, his heart started to beat faster. It hammered against his ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. He climbed the 3 steps up to the stage. The wooden planks creaked under his weight. He stood there, looking at the large shape in front of him. It was covered by the heavy cloth to protect the dust from settling on the strings and the keys. He reached out a hand. His fingers were dirty. His nails were short and broken from carrying boxes and scrubbing floors. He hesitated. He didn't want to stain the cloth. He quickly wiped his hands on his pants, trying to clean them off as best as he could. Then, with a shaky hand, he gripped the edge of the black cloth. He lifted it. He pulled the cloth back and folded it gently over the back of the piano. There it was. The keys were white and smooth, made of ivory. The black keys were shiny. It was beautiful. It looked like a long row of teeth waiting to bite or perhaps waiting to smile. He looked around the room one last time. He was alone. The silence in the hall was deep. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a waiting silence. The building seemed to be holding its breath. He sat down on the bench. The bench was padded with leather. It was firm but comfortable. He was much higher up here than he was when he sat on his bed at home. He felt a strange sensation in his stomach, like he was floating. He placed his feet on the pedals. His boots were dusty, but he was careful not to press down yet. He just rested them there. He hovered his hands over the keys. He didn't touch them yet. He could feel the energy coming from the instrument. Pianos are strange things. They are made of wood and metal and felt, but when you sit in front of them, they feel alive. They remember the music that has been played on them before. He thought about all the people who would play this piano later that night. They would wear tuxedos and fancy dresses. They would play songs that people expected to hear. They would play perfectly. But they would play with their heads, not with their hearts. The man took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. He pictured his small, quiet room. He pictured the headphones on his ears. He remembered the feeling of the music he had practiced for 6 months. It was a complex piece. It was difficult. There were parts where the hands had to move very fast, and other parts where they had to be as soft as a whisper. He knew he was risking his job. If the woman in the blue dress walked in, or if the security guard came by, he would be thrown out immediately. He would probably be fired. But as he sat there, the fear began to fade. The only thing that mattered was the sound waiting to be released. He lowered his hands. His rough, calloused fingers were just inches from the keys. He took a breath that filled his entire chest. Then his right hand went down. He pressed a key. Thump. The sound was deep and resonant. It wasn't the electronic, processed sound of his cheap keyboard. This was a natural sound. It was the vibration of a felt hammer hitting a metal string. The sound rang out in the empty hall. It bounced off the walls and the ceiling. It was a single note, but it was rich and full of color. The man smiled a very small smile. Just the corners of his mouth turned up. It had been so long. He didn't realize how much he missed the feeling of the wood pushing back. Against his fingers, he placed his left hand on the keys. He pressed a chord. The sound filled the air. It washed over him like a warm wave. For a moment, he forgot that he was a cleaner. He forgot that he was poor. He forgot that he had been laughed at. He was just a musician, and the hall was his instrument. He began to play. At first, his fingers were a little stiff. They were cold from the cleaning work. But as the music continued, they warmed up. He played a simple melody, letting the notes hang in the air. He listened to how the piano naturally faded the sound away. He didn't rush. He let the music breathe. He looked out at the empty rows of seats. In his mind, the room was full. He imagined people sitting there, listening. He imagined them quieting down as they heard the emotion in the music. It was a sad song, but a beautiful one. It sounded like loneliness turning into strength. He played with a gentle touch, treating the keys with great respect. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to prove how fast he could play. He was just telling a story. It was the story of his life. It was the story of hard work, of invisible struggles, and of a hope that never died, even when it was buried under years of disappointment. The music flowed out of him, pouring from his heart through his veins and out of his fingertips. The hall was no longer silent. It was singing. He forgot about the clock. He forgot about the risk. He was lost in the sound, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The music swelled, filling the high ceiling of the hall with a sound that was both beautiful and terribly sad. The man was lost in it now. He wasn't thinking about his dirty boots or the wrinkled shirt he wore. His eyes were closed, and his head leaned slightly to the side, as if he were listening to a voice only he could hear. His hands moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised him. The music was fast, then slow, then loud, then soft. It was a conversation without words. The piano seemed to like him. The notes rang out clearly, vibrating against the walls and the empty seats. For a few minutes, the man wasn't a cleaner or a nobody. He was a master. He felt the familiar joy of creating something out of silence. It was a feeling he had missed for years. A feeling that was like drinking cold water on a hot day. But the moment was fragile. It broke before he was ready. Suddenly, the heavy steel safety curtain at the very back of the hall banged loudly. The sound of metal hitting metal echoed through the room, cutting through the soft ending of the music the man was playing. He jumped, his hands slipping off the keys and hitting a jarring, discordant noise. The beautiful melody was dead, replaced by a harsh, ugly sound. The man spun around on the bench. His heart was pounding, not from the music, but from sudden fear. Standing near the double doors at the back of the room was the head of the board. This man was older, wearing a crisp suit that looked expensive. He had a gray mustache and glasses that sat low on his nose. He was shouting into a cell phone, but the moment he saw the figure on the stage, he stopped talking. The man in the suit looked furious. He marched down the center aisle. His footsteps were heavy and fast. He didn't walk. He stomped. The man on the stage shrank back. He tried to stand up, but his legs felt weak. He froze, sitting on the edge of the bench, clutching the sides. "Hey, you," the man in the suit yelled. His voice bounced off the walls, much louder than the piano had been. "Get off that instrument! What do you think you are doing?" The cleaner opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just watched the angry man coming closer. The man in the suit reached the front of the stage. He didn't climb the stairs, but he leaned over the edge, pointing a finger directly at the cleaner's face. "That is a rented piano," he shouted. "Do you have any idea how much that costs? It is worth more than you make in a year. It is not for touching. It is for the artists." "I was just—" the cleaner started. His voice was shaking. "I didn't mean to break anything. I was just playing. The man in the suit laughed. It was a cold, mean laugh. "You call that noise playing? I heard it from the hallway. It was terrible. And look at your hands. They are filthy." He gestured wildly at the cleaner's rough, calloused fingers. "You have probably ruined the finish. You have probably put grease all over the ivory keys." The cleaner looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a worker. They were scarred and weathered. He suddenly felt very ashamed. He had thought the music was beautiful. He had thought the piano accepted him. But looking at the angry man's face, he felt like a child who had broken a window. "I am sorry," the cleaner whispered. "I will go. I will leave." "You are not just going to leave," the man in the suit snapped. "I am reporting this. Who hired you? You are supposed to be setting up chairs, not abusing expensive equipment. You people have no respect. You think because you are here, you can do whatever you want? The words stung like a slap. You people. The man on the bench didn't say anything. He just nodded his head slowly. He felt the heavy weight of his reality crashing down on him again. The music had been a dream. This shouting was real life. Get out of my sight, the man in the suit said, stepping back and smoothing his expensive tie. If I see you near that piano again, I will have the police remove you. And don't think I won't deduct the cost of cleaning it from your paycheck. You will be paying for this for months. The cleaner stood up. He felt dizzy. He looked at the piano one last time. It looked beautiful still, but now it felt like something forbidden, something dangerous. He had reached for something that didn't belong to him, and he had been slapped back down. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice barely audible. He didn't wait for the man in the suit to yell again. He turned and walked toward the side stairs. As he walked down the steps, his boots sounded loud and clumsy. He felt the man in the suit's eyes burning into his back. He felt small. He felt dirty. He kept his head down, looking at the floor, counting the cracks in the tiles as he walked. He reached the side exit. It was a plain metal door. He pushed it open and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the hallway was cooler, but it didn't feel refreshing. It felt lonely. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the grand hall and the angry man. He stood there for a moment, leaning against the wall. He put his hands in his pockets. His right hand brushed against the crumpled piece of paper again. He took it out and looked at it. It was just a list of names now. It meant nothing. He had tried to ask for a chance, and they had said no. He had tried to take a small moment for himself, and they had taken it away. He wanted to cry, but he was too tired. Instead, he just crumpled the paper into a tight ball. He threw it into a nearby trash can. It missed and hit the rim, falling to the floor. He didn't pick it up. He started walking down the long hallway toward the staff break room. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. He felt a hollowness in his chest that hurt physically. He had thought, just for a few minutes, that he was special. He thought he had talent that mattered. But the man in the suit was right. He was just the help. He was the guy who swept the floors. The silence of the hallway was loud in his ears. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the music he had made. It was the silence of failure. He walked slowly, his shoulders slumped forward. He just wanted to go home, but he had hours left on his shift. He had to go back and clean. He had to go back and make everything shiny for the people who mattered, the people who were allowed to touch the piano. The sun had completely gone down, and the dark sky outside was filled with stars that no one inside could see. The community center had transformed. The messy smell of floor wax was gone, replaced by the strong scent of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and rich food. The harsh overhead lights were turned off. Instead, the room glowed with soft, warm lights that hung from the ceiling. The stage looked magnificent, bathed in a spotlight that made the black piano shine like a jewel. People began to arrive. They were dressed in their finest clothes. The men wore dark suits with shiny shoes. The women wore colorful dresses and jewelry that sparkled when they moved. The sound of their chatter filled the air. It was a happy, excited noise, the sound of people with money and status expecting a wonderful evening. The cleaner stood near the back of the hall, wearing a long white apron over his gray shirt. He was holding a silver tray filled with glasses of champagne. He felt like a ghost among them. He moved through the crowd, offering drinks, his eyes lowered. He was invisible to the guests. If someone reached out and took a glass, they might nod slightly, but they never really looked at him. To them, he was just a machine that delivered drinks. He watched them laugh and talk about their vacations and their jobs. He felt a deep ache in his chest, but it was different from the pain he felt earlier. It was a numb feeling now. He had been scolded. He had been humiliated. He had been told he was worthless. He had accepted it. He had put his dream away in a box and locked it. But then he looked at the stage. The piano sat there, waiting. The bench was empty. A murmur went through the crowd near the front. The woman in the blue dress was standing by the stage steps, looking at her watch and talking frantically into a headset. She looked upset. The cleaner moved a little closer, pretending to clear empty glasses from a small table so he could hear. "They are stuck in traffic on the highway," she whispered loudly to the younger man with the cables. "The pianist isn't going to be here for at least 20 minutes. We have a gap." "A 20-minute gap," the younger man paled. "What are we going to do? These people paid good money. They won't wait quietly." "We have to stall," she said. "I'll go up and make an announcement. Maybe we can serve another round of drinks. Just keep the music playing in the speakers." The cleaner stared at the stage. His heart, which had been quiet and numb, suddenly gave a violent thump. He looked at the woman in the blue dress. He remembered how she had laughed at him. He remembered how the man in the suit had screamed at him. Every instinct in his brain told him to stay in the corner, to stay safe, to stay invisible. But then he thought about the music. He thought about the way the notes had felt under his fingers. He thought about the silent keyboard in his apartment. He realized that this might be the only chance he would ever get in his entire life. If he walked away now, he would regret it forever. He would be an old man with nothing but the memory of being too scared to try. He put his tray down on a table. His hands were shaking so badly that the glasses clinked together. He took a deep breath. He felt a sweat breaking out on his forehead. He walked toward the woman in the blue dress. She was still talking to the younger man, looking stressed. She didn't see him coming until he was right in front of her. She looked at him, annoyed. "What? What do you want?" "We are busy." "Go refill the tray," I heard the cleaner said. His voice was raspy and quiet. "I heard the pianist is late." The woman rolled her eyes. "That is none of your business. Go away. I can play," he said. The words rushed out of him like water from a broken dam. "I can play until he gets here. I know the piece. I know many pieces." The woman stared at him as if he had suggested flying to the moon. "Are you crazy?" "You? Absolutely not. Go back to work." "Please," he said. He didn't bow his head this time. He looked her in the eye. "It is just 20 minutes. The crowd is getting restless. They want to see something. I am good. I promise you, I am good. I won't embarrass you." The younger man laughed. "This again? Look, buddy, you already caused enough trouble. Don't make us call security." The cleaner ignored the younger man. He focused on the woman. "I don't want money. I just want to play. Give me one chance. If they hate it, I will stop. I will leave and never come back. But let me try." The woman looked at the impatient crowd. She looked at the empty stage. She looked at her watch. The gap was a disaster. She needed a solution. She looked at the cleaner's dirty hands, his worn-out apron. It was a huge risk. It was crazy, but he was standing there with such intensity. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He looked like a man who was about to jump off a cliff if she said no. "Fine," she snapped suddenly. "Fine. If you go out there and you are terrible, you are fired. You will not only be fired, I will make sure you never work in this town again. Do you understand?" The cleaner nodded. "Yes, I understand. And don't touch the microphone," she added. "Just sit down and play. And if the pianist walks in, you get off immediately. You don't say a word." "Okay," he said. "Thank you." "Go," she said, waving her hand toward the stage steps. "Hurry." The cleaner turned and walked toward the stage. His legs felt heavy, like lead weights. He walked past the velvet ropes. He climbed the stairs. The people in the front row looked at him with confusion. They whispered to each other. "Is that the waiter? What is he doing? Is this a joke?" He ignored them. He walked to the center of the light. It was blindingly bright. He couldn't see the audience anymore, just a wall of darkness. He sat down on the bench. It felt familiar now. He placed his feet on the pedals. He looked out at the darkness. He thought about the long nights in his apartment. He thought about the people who had told him he was nothing. He thought about the woman who had given him this chance only because she was desperate. He took a deep breath. He didn't touch the microphone. He just raised his hands. The hall was still buzzing with conversation. People were laughing, drinking, and checking their phones. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that the man in the apron was about to pour his soul out onto the keys. He hovered his hands for just a second. He closed his eyes. He pictured the first note in his mind. He felt the calmness settle over him. The fear was gone. There was only the music. It was time to show them who he really was. For a few seconds, the man did not play. He just sat there, his back to the audience, his shoulders rising and falling with every deep breath. The grand piano sat silently in front of him, a massive beast made of black wood and metal strings. Behind him, the hum of 200 conversations filled the air. It was the sound of wealth and boredom, of people checking their watches and wondering when the real show would begin. A glass clinked loudly somewhere in the back. Someone laughed. Then his hands moved. They did not gently tap the keys. They struck them. The first sound was not a note, it was a crash, a sudden, violent explosion of sound that ripped through the air like a thunderclap. It was a low, rumbling bass chord that shook the floorboards and vibrated through the seats. The conversation stopped instantly. Heads snapped up. Glasses froze halfway to mouths. The laughter died as if someone had suddenly turned off a switch. The sound that followed the crash was fast. It was a torrent of notes, cascading down the scale like a waterfall of rocks. It was aggressive and raw. The man played with his eyes shut tight. His face was not calm. It was twisted with emotion. He looked like he was fighting a battle. His dirty gray hair flopped over his forehead as his head bobbed to the rhythm he created. His fingers, rough and scarred, flew across the ivory keys with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age. They were a blur of motion. He wasn't playing the polite background music they expected. He wasn't playing a gentle waltz. He was playing something that sounded like a cry from the depths of the earth. It was chaotic and beautiful. It sounded like the struggle of a life lived in the shadows. It sounded like anger and grief and a fierce, burning hope all mixed together. The woman in the blue dress stood near the side of the stage. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at the younger man, her eyes wide. The younger man had dropped his clipboard. He was staring at the stage, his mouth open. They both expected him to fail. They expected him to be bad. Instead, the sound coming from the piano was filling the entire hall. Bouncing off the high ceiling and soaking into the walls, the music changed. It softened for a moment, shifting from the angry crash to a melody so sad and tender that it made people's chests hurt. It was a simple tune, high up on the keyboard, singing out over the deep, rolling bass notes. It was the sound of a lonely bird flying over a dark ocean. In the third row, a woman in a diamond necklace blinked. She stopped fidgeting with her purse. She just stared at the back of the man in the apron. She saw the way his body moved with the instrument. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She realized he wasn't just pressing buttons. He was bleeding sound. The audience was captivated. It wasn't just that he was good. It was that he was real. In a room full of fake smiles and expensive clothes, this was the most honest thing they had ever heard. The music told a story without words. It told them about hard work. It told them about rejection. It told them about standing in the cold while others sat in the warm. The man didn't care about the technique. He didn't care if he missed a note. He played with feeling. He hit the keys hard, sometimes so hard it seemed his fingers might bruise. He dug into the sound, pulling every ounce of emotion out of the strings. He played for the nights he spent hungry. He played for the people who ignored him in the hallway. He played for the man in the suit who told him he was worthless. The music swelled again, growing louder and faster. It was a storm now. The bass notes were thumping like a heartbeat. The high notes were screaming. The man was sweating heavily. The white apron on his back was soaking wet. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, but he didn't stop. He poured every bit of his remaining energy into the performance. The rich people in the front row were mesmerized. They forgot about their money. They forgot about their status. They forgot to judge his clothes. They only heard the sound. They heard the pain and the beauty in it. For the first time all night, the room was completely silent. There was no whispering. No one looked at their phones. 200 people were held hostage by the music of a man they had tried to throw out only an hour ago. The man in the suit, the one who had yelled at him earlier, was standing near the back door. He had entered to check on the progress. When the first chord hit, he froze. Now he stood in the shadows, listening. His face, usually red with anger, was pale. He watched the dirty boots resting on the pedals. He watched the worn hands flying across the keys. He felt a strange sensation in his throat, a tightness he hadn't felt in years. He realized he had been wrong. The piece was coming to an end. The man on the bench slowed his hands. The chaotic rush of notes began to separate. They became clearer, more distinct. He played the final melody one last time, high and sweet and lonely. He played it softer and softer and softer. His right hand played the last chord. His left hand pressed the pedal, letting the sound hang in the air. He held the pose, his hands hovering over the keys, his head bowed. The final note drifted away, fading into the high rafters of the ceiling. It didn't disappear all at once. It slowly dissolved into the air, leaving a ghost of a sound behind. Then, there was silence. But it wasn't the empty silence of before. It was a heavy, thick silence. It was the silence of people who had just witnessed something profound. No one moved. No one spoke. No one clapped immediately. They just sat there, letting the feeling wash over them. It lasted for 10 seconds, maybe 15. It felt like an hour. The man on the bench sat still. He was exhausted. He couldn't hear the silence because his ears were ringing with the music. He slowly opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling violently. He took a ragged breath. Then a sound came from the back of the room. It was a single person clapping, slowly, rhythmically. It was the man in the suit. Then another person joined in. Then the woman in the third row. Suddenly the silence broke. The applause wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. It started as a wave and grew into a thunder that shook the walls. People stood up. They weren't just sitting and clapping. They were on their feet, shouting, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The cleaner sat frozen on the bench. He didn't know what to do. The noise was overwhelming. He turned his head slightly to look out at the audience. He didn't see a room of judges anymore. He saw a room full of human beings, moved by the same thing that moved him. He saw the woman in the blue dress near the stage. She wasn't holding her clipboard. She was clapping too, a look of shock and respect on her face. She gave him a small nod. The man stood up slowly. He didn't bow like a fancy performer. He didn't wave his arms. He just stood there, in his white apron and his dirty boots, and looked at them. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the lights. He didn't need them to tell him he was good anymore. He knew. He walked to the side of the stage, keeping his head down, humble as always. But as he walked down the stairs, the applause got louder. People reached out to pat him on the shoulder as he passed. He didn't pull away. He walked through the crowd, invisible no more. He walked toward the exit, carrying the silence of the piano in his heart and the sound of their applause in his ears. He had his one chance. He had taken it, and he had one.